"Get out of my seat now!" The voice of Dashiell Montclair cut through the first-class cabin like a knife, drawing the attention of every passenger on Flight 447 from New York to Los Angeles. His face was red with indignation as he literally grabbed 22-year-old Evangeline Thornberry by the sleeve of her modest blazer, attempting to physically remove her from seat 2A. "Sir, please," Evangeline said quietly, her voice trembling as she tried to maintain her composure while being manhandled in front of dozens of strangers. "If you could just let me explain." "Don't give me excuses," Dashiell interrupted, his grip tightening on her arm. "You clearly don't belong here. This is first class, not some charity bus." Winslow Ashford, the head flight attendant, rushed over from the galley, her professional demeanor barely masking her shock at what she was witnessing. "Sir, please release the passenger immediately. We can resolve this calmly." "Resolve what calmly?" Dashiell's voice rose even higher, causing passengers throughout the cabin to pull out their phones and begin recording. "I paid $15,000 for this seat, and I'm not going to accept this. Look at her. She obviously doesn't have the money to be sitting here." Evangeline stumbled as Dashiell gave her another forceful tug, and her leather portfolio fell from her hands, sending papers flying across the aisle. Business documents, contracts, and official correspondence scattered across the expensive carpet of the first-class cabin like confetti. The humiliation was overwhelming. Evangeline had faced discrimination before. It came with being a young black woman in the business world, but never anything this public, this degrading. She could hear the whispers starting among the other passengers, see the phones pointed in her direction, and feel the familiar sting of being judged solely on her appearance. Tears began to well up in her eyes as she dropped to her knees to gather her scattered documents. This was supposed to be a routine business trip to finalize a merger that would revolutionize sustainable technology. Instead, she was being treated like a criminal for the crime of sitting in a seat she had every right to occupy. "Look, everyone," Dashiell announced to the cabin, his voice dripping with mockery. "She probably couldn't even afford to pay for this ticket. I bet she upgraded herself somehow, or talked her way into first class." The laughter that followed was cruel and cutting. Arabella Fairweather, an elegant woman in her 50s sitting across the aisle, shook her head in disapproval. "This is really inappropriate. Someone should call security." "Security should remove her," another passenger chimed in. "This is exactly what's wrong with airlines these days. No standards anymore." Evangeline's hands shook as she tried to collect her paper, but they kept slipping through her fingers. Among the documents were contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars, merger agreements that would create thousands of jobs, and correspondence from some of the most powerful people in technology and government. But all these passengers saw was a young black woman they believed didn't belong in exclusive space. "I can prove I have the right to be here," Evangeline whispered, her voice barely audible over the noise of the cabin. "Prove it," Dashiell laughed harshly. "With what? Fake documents? Forged credit cards?" When Evangeline opened her designer handbag to retrieve her identification and ticket confirmation, Dashiell deliberately knocked it from her hand, sending the contents spilling across the floor. "Oops," he said with mock innocence, grinning at the passengers who were recording the entire incident. How clumsy. Evangeline stared at her scattered belongings, her phone, her wallet, her business cards, all mixed with the contracts and documents that represented years of work and billions of dollars in potential deals. The degradation was complete. She realized with growing horror that this incident was being filmed by dozens of people. By tonight, it would be viral. By tomorrow, it would be on every news station in the country. The young CEO who had worked so hard to build her reputation would be known forever as the woman who was humiliated on an airplane for trying to sit in first class. "Please," she whispered, her voice breaking, "please just let me gather my things." But Dashiell wasn't finished. He bent down and picked up one of the scattered contracts, holding it high above his head like a trophy. "Oh, this is rich," he announced to the cabin. "Look, everyone! She's got fake business documents. $200 million? He burst into laughter. "What a joke! She's pretending to be some kind of CEO or something." The document he was holding was real. It was a merger agreement between her company, Neotech Solutions, and a major automotive manufacturer to develop the next generation of electric vehicle battery. The deal would create 15,000 jobs and revolutionize clean energy technology. It was one of the most important business agreements of the decade. But to Dashiell and the other passengers, it was just another piece of evidence that this young woman was a fraud. 200 million! Another passenger laughed. At her age? Please. The audacity is incredible, Arabella added, shaking her head. To come on here with fake documents, trying to scam her way into first class. Evangeline felt something break inside her chest. This wasn't just about a seat on an airplane anymore. This was about every assumption, every microaggression, every time someone had looked at her and decided she didn't belong simply because of the color of her skin. She stopped trying to reach for the contract in Dashiell's hand. She stopped trying to explain herself. She simply curled up on the floor of the cabin, surrounded by her scattered life's work, and began to shake uncontrollably. The laughter in the cabin slowly died down as passengers realized they were witnessing something more serious than a simple seating dispute. Evangeline was having what appeared to be a panic attack, her breathing rapid and shallow, her entire body trembling with the force of her distress. "Oh my God," someone whispered. "Is she okay? Maybe we should get a doctor," another passenger suggested uncertainly. But the damage was done. The humiliation was complete. And in the back of the first-class cabin, Travis Kelce had been watching the entire scene unfold with an expression that no one could quite read. His hands were clenched into fists at his sides, and there was something building in his eyes that looked very much like barely controlled fury. He had been trying to mind his own business, trying to avoid the spotlight that followed him everywhere he went. But what he had just witnessed went beyond anything he could ignore. This wasn't just about airline policies or seating disputes. This was about human dignity, about justice, about the kind of cruelty that revealed the worst aspect of human nature. Travis stood up slowly, his 6'5" frame casting a shadow over the cabin. Every eye turned toward him, phones still recording. Passengers suddenly realized that one of the most famous athletes in America had been watching their behavior the entire time, and the expression on his face suggested that what happened next was going to change everything. Dashiell held the contract above his head like he had just won a prize, reveling in the attention and laughter from the other passengers. The document, a legitimate merger agreement worth hundreds of millions of dollars, fluttered in his grasp as he waved it around for everyone to see. $200 million, he announced again, his voice filled with theatrical disbelief. Can you believe this? At her age? What is she, 22? 23? And she expects us to believe she's some kind of business mogul? The cabin erupted in renewed laughter. Passengers were leaning into the aisle to get a better view, their phones capturing every moment of Evangeline's humiliation. The cruelty was becoming entertainment, and Dashiell was playing to his audience with the enthusiasm of a performer who had found his stage. "I mean, look at this language," he continued, squinting at the contract with exaggerated confusion. "Sustainable energy solution, automotive partnership, job creation initiatives. She really went all out with this fantasy, didn't she?" Evangeline tried to reach for the document, stretching her arm toward Dashiell from where she remained crouched on the floor. "Please give that back to me," she said, her voice barely audible. "It's important." "Important?" Dashiell laughed and pulled the contract away from her reach. "The only thing that's important here is that security removes you from this aircraft before you embarrass yourself any further." He turned to the other passengers, seeking their validation. "I mean, seriously, has anyone here ever seen anything so ridiculous? The nerve of some people." Caspian West, a businessman in his 40s, shook his head in disgust. "It's actually insulting to those of us who worked hard to afford these. To have someone come in here with forged documents, trying to scam the system." "Exactly," agreed Serafina Blackwood, an older woman wearing expensive jewelry. "I've been flying first class for 30 years, and I've never seen anything like this level of deception." Dashiell, emboldened by the support, decided to take his performance even further. He began passing the contract to other passengers, making a game out of keeping it away from Evangeline. "Here, take a look at this masterpiece of fiction," he said, handing the document to Arabella. "I bet she printed this out at a FedEx office." Arabella examined the contract with the air of someone conducting a scientific investigation. "The paper quality is actually quite good," he said thoughtfully. She really invested in making this look authentic. "Please," Evangeline whispered, tears streaming down her face as she watched her confidential business documents being passed around like a joke. "Please, give that back to me." "Oh, honey," Arabella said in a condescending tone, "you don't need to keep up this charade. There's no shame in being less fortunate. You just can't pretend to be something you're not on an airplane full of people. The contract was passed to Sterling Montgomery, a tech executive who claimed to know everyone important in Silicon Valley. He studied the document with the confidence of someone who believed he could spot a fake from a mile away. The letterhead looks professional, he admitted grudgingly, but anyone can design a logo these days. And Neotech Solutions? I've never heard of any company by that name, and I know everyone in the tech industry. Because it's fake! Dashiell exclaimed triumphantly. The whole thing is an elaborate fantasy. She probably watches too many movies about successful businesswomen and decided to live out her dreams on an airplane. The laughter was becoming crueler now, fed by mob mentality and the intoxicating power of group humiliation. Passengers who might have been reasonable and kind in other circumstances were caught up in the collective cruelty, their empathy overwhelmed by their desire to be part of the dominant group. Evangeline had stopped trying to reach for her document. The fight had gone out of her completely, and she remained curled up on the floor of the cabin, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. The panic attack was intensifying, making it difficult for her to breathe properly, but none of the passengers seemed to notice or care about her obvious distress. "Maybe we should call the police when we land," suggested Phoenix Caldwell, a woman who had been recording the entire incident. "I mean, if she's traveling with forged documents, that's probably illegal, right?" "Good idea," Dashiell agreed eagerly. "We should definitely have her arrested. Make an example of her so other people don't try this kind of scam." Winslow, the flight attendant, had been trying to de-escalate the situation, but she was overwhelmed by the intensity of the passenger's reaction. "Sir, please return the document to the passenger," she said to Dashiell. "Whatever the situation is, we need to handle this professionally." "Professionally?" Dashiell scoffed. "The professional thing to do is remove her from this aircraft. I didn't pay $15,000 to be subjected to this kind of fraud. The document belongs to her, regardless of its authenticity," Winslow insisted. But her authority was being completely ignored by passengers who had worked themselves into a frenzy of righteous indignation. Sterling was still examining the contract, pointing out details to other passengers. "Look at these signatures," he said. "They're supposed to be from the CEO of Meridian Automotive. I've met Robert Chen several times, and this doesn't look like his signature at all." The signature was indeed Robert Chen, applied to the contract just 3 days earlier during a meeting in Evangeline's Manhattan office. But none of these passengers would ever believe that a 22-year-old black woman could have legitimate business relationships with Fortune 500 companies. "The whole thing is pathetic," Serafina added with disgust. "Young people today think they can fake their way to success instead of working for it like the rest of us did." Dashiell retrieved the contract from Sterling and held it high again, his voice rising to address the entire cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, what we have here is a perfect example of everything that's wrong with society today. People who think they can cheat and lie their way into spaces they don't belong." The applause that followed was spontaneous and enthusiastic. Passengers who had never met each before were united in their shared contempt for the young woman who had dared to occupy a first-class seat in black. Evangeline could hear every word, could feel the weight of their judgment pressing down on her like a physical force. This was her worst nightmare realized. Being publicly humiliated, having her achievements dismissed as fantasy, being reduced to a stereotype and a punchline. But what made it even worse was the knowledge that this was all being recorded. Tomorrow, the world would see her at her most vulnerable moment, curled up on an airplane floor, while strangers mocked her life's work. The silence that followed Dashiell's speech was heavy and oppressive. The laughter had finally died down, and passengers were beginning to realize that they were witnessing something that had gone far beyond a simple seating. The young woman on the floor was clearly in severe distress, and their behavior had been anything but kind or reasonable. But it was too late to take back their word, too late to undo the cruelty they had participated in. The damage was done, the humiliation complete. And in the back of the cabin, Travis Kelce continued to watch, with an expression that was growing darker by the minute. The first-class cabin fell into an eerie silence as Travis Kelce rose from his seat. At 6 feet 5 inches tall, with the powerful build of a professional athlete, his presence immediately commanded attention. Every passenger who had been laughing and jeering just moments before suddenly found themselves holding their breath, sensing that something significant was about to happen. Travis moved down the aisle with deliberate, measured step, There was something in his posture, in the set of his shoulder, and the expression on his face that suggested barely controlled fury. He wasn't rushing, wasn't shouting, but every person in that cabin could feel the intensity radiating from him like heat from a furnace. "Give her the document back," Travis said when he reached Dashiell, his voice low and deadly calm. "Now!" Dashiell, still holding Evangeline's contract above his head like a trophy, turned to face Travis with a smirk. The businessman was clearly enjoying his moment in the spotlight and wasn't about to be intimidated by anyone, even a famous athlete. "Oh, what's this?" Dashiell said mockingly. "The cavalry arrived? Let me guess. You're going to tell us we're all terrible people for exposing this obvious fraud?" "I'm going to tell you to return that woman's property to her immediately," Travis replied, his voice remaining level despite the anger burning in his eyes. "Her property?" Dashiell laughed. "This fake contract? These forged documents? I'm pretty sure fraud doesn't constitute legal ownership." Travis took another step closer, and suddenly the space between them felt charged with tension. "You have 5 seconds to give her that document back." "Or what?" Dashiell challenged, puffing out his chest. "You're going to hit me? On an airplane? In front of all these witnesses?" "I don't think so, big guy." The standoff lasted for what felt like an eternity. Every passenger in the cabin was riveted by the confrontation, their phones still recording, capturing every moment of the tense exchange. Here was one of the most recognizable athletes in America, facing off against a belligerent businessman who refused to back down. But Travis didn't respond to Dashiell's taunt. Instead, he did something that no one expected. He walked over to where Winslow was standing near the galley and calmly took the intercom microphone from her hand. "Ladies and gentlemen," Travis's voice echoed throughout the entire aircraft, reaching not just the first-class cabin, but every passenger on the plane. "This is Travis Kelce. I need everyone to listen very carefully to what I'm about to tell you." A murmur of confusion rippled through the cabin. Passengers in economy and business class were straining to understand what was happening in first class, why a famous NFL player was making an announcement on their flight. "You have just witnessed something that will change your understanding of human decency forever," Travis continued, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to addressing large crowds. "You have just participated in the public humiliation of one of the most important people in this country." Dashiell's smirk began to fade as he realized the situation was spiraling beyond his control. The other passengers who had been laughing and jeering just minutes before were now looking uncertain, as if they were beginning to understand that they might have made a terrible mistake. "What you think you know about the young woman sitting on the floor of this cabin is wrong," Travis said. "What you have assumed about her based on her appearance is wrong, and what you have done to her is unforgivable." Evangeline looked up from where she was still crouched on the floor, tears streaming down her face. She was confused by Travis's intervention, unsure why this stranger was defending her when no one else had shown her any kindness. "She doesn't need to prove anything to you people," Travis continued. "She doesn't need to justify her presence in this cabin or defend her right to exist in the same space as you. But since you've made her prove her worth, let me help her do exactly that." Travis knelt down beside Evangeline, his voice becoming gentler. "You don't have to hide who you are," he said quietly, though the microphone still carried his words throughout the plane. "These people need to see the truth." "What if they don't believe it?" Evangeline whispered, her voice barely audible. "Then I'll make them believe," Travis replied with quiet conviction. He helped Evangeline to her feet, steadying her with one hand while he held the microphone with the other. She was still shaking from the panic attack, still overwhelmed by the humiliation she had endured, but there was something in Travis's presence that gave her strength. Travis pulled out his cell phone and dialed a number with practiced efficiency. The call connected almost immediately, and he put it on speaker so everyone in the cabin could hear. "Kelce residence, this is Margaret speaking," came a professional female voice through the phone. "Margaret, this is Travis. I need you to do me a favor. I'm on a flight with someone, and I need you to verify some information for a cabin full of people who are about to learn a very important lesson about making assumptions." "Of course, Mr. Kelce. What information do you need verified?" Travis looked directly at Dashiell, who was still holding Evangeline's contract, but no longer looked confident about his position. "I need you to look up Evangeline Thornberry, age 22. Tell me what you find." There was a brief pause as Margaret axed whatever database she was consulting. When she spoke again, her words carried clearly through the aircraft's sounds. "Evangeline Thornberry, age 22, Chief Executive Officer of Neotech Solutions, graduated summa cum laude from MIT at age 19 with dual degrees in electrical engineering and business administration. Net worth approximately $800 million, according to the most recent Forbes assessment. The silence that followed was deafening. Every passenger in the first-class cabin sat frozen, their faces reflecting various stages of shock, disbelief, and growing horror as they began to understand the magnitude of their mistake. "Continue," Travis said into the phone. She was named Forbes' youngest self-made billionaire last year, though market fluctuations have reduced her net worth to approximately $800 million. She holds 17 patents in sustainable energy technology and has been called the most important innovator of her generation by MIT Technology Review. Dashiell's face had gone completely pale. The contract in his hands suddenly felt like it was burning his finger, and he stared at it with new understanding. This wasn't a fake document. This was a real merger agreement involving a real company run by a real CEO who happened to be the young black woman he'd spent the last 30 minutes humiliating. She is currently finalizing a merger with Meridian Automotive that will create 15,000 jobs and revolutionize electric vehicle technology, Margaret continued. The deal is worth approximately $2 billion and is considered one of the most important business agreements of the decade. The horror on the passengers' faces was becoming more pronounced with each word. They were beginning to understand that they hadn't just made a mistake, they had participated in the public humiliation of one of the most successful young entrepreneurs in American history. And it had all been recorded on dozens of phones. She has been invited to speak at the World Economic Forum, has advised 3 sitting senators on technology policy, and is currently being considered for a Presidential Medal of Freedom for her contributions to sustainable energy. Margaret's voice continued through the airplane's speakers, each word landing like a hammer blow on the assembled passengers. The first-class cabin had become a tomb. No one was laughing anymore. No one was taking photos or videos for their social media accounts. The cruel entertainment that had united them in mob mentality just minutes before had transformed into a collective realization of their own moral bankruptcy. Dashiell stood frozen, still holding the contract, but now understanding exactly what document he had been waving around like a prop in his performance. This wasn't a fake merger agreement. It was one of the most significant business deals in recent memory, involving one of the most influential young leaders in the country. "Thank you, Margaret," Travis said into the phone before ending the call. He turned to address the cabin again, his voice carrying a weight that made everyone understand they were about to hear something that would stay with them for the rest of their lives. "Evangeline Thornberry," Travis announced, graduated from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology at 19 years old. She built her first company while she was still in college, sold it for $50 million, and used that money to found Neotech Solutions when she was 20. Evangeline was standing beside him now, no longer cowering on the floor, but not yet ready to speak for herself. The panic attack was subsiding, but the emotional trauma of the last hour was still overwhelming. She had built her entire career on being taken seriously, despite her age and race, and in 30 minutes, these strangers had reduced her to a caricature. Her company has developed battery technology that will make electric vehicles affordable for working families, Travis continued. Her innovations have attracted partnerships with every major automotive manufacturer in the world. She employs over 2,000 people and has created technology that will reduce carbon emissions by millions of tons over the next decade. Sterling Montgomery, the tech executive who had claimed to know everyone important in Silicon Valley, was staring at Evangeline with growing recognition. He was beginning to remember where he had seen her face before. On the cover of Fortune magazine, in interviews with major news networks, in keynote presentations at technology conferences he had attended. "Oh my God," he whispered, loud enough for others to hear. "I know who you are. I've seen your presentation. The battery technology, the sustainable manufacturing process, Neotech Solution. You're the CEO everyone's been talking about. The merger with Meridian," Arabella said slowly, pieces clicking together in her mind. "I read about it in the Wall Street Journal. $2 billion, 15,000 new jobs. That's real." Evangeline found her voice for the first time since the ordeal began. When she spoke, it was with the quiet authority of someone who had addressed boardrooms full of Fortune 500 executives, who had presented to Congress, who had been interviewed by every major media outlet in the country. "The contract Mr. Montclair was using as entertainment," she said, her voice steady despite everything she had endured, "was signed 3 days ago in my office in Manhattan. The signatures are real. The deal is real. The 15,000 jobs it will create are real." Dashiell finally let the contract fall from his hands. It fluttered to the floor like a wounded bird, landing near Evangeline's feet. He looked like he might be sick. "I didn't know," he said weakly. I assumed." "You assumed," Evangeline said quietly, "that a young black woman couldn't possibly belong in first class. You assumed that someone who looks like me couldn't possibly have earned the right to sit in the same space as you. You assumed that my success must be fake, my achievements must be fraudulent, my presence must be some kind of mistake." The weight of her words settled over the cabin like a shroud. Every passenger who had participated in her humiliation was now forced to confront the ugly truth about their own prejudice, their own willingness to dehumanize someone based on race and age. "And you weren't content to just think those things," Evangeline continued, her voice growing stronger. "You had to act on them. You had to turn my existence into entertainment. You had to make my achievements into a joke. You had to reduce me to a stereotype and a punchline." Seraphina Blackwood was crying now, her expensive makeup running down her cheeks. "We're sorry," she whispered. "We're so sorry. We didn't understand." "Sorry for what?" Evangeline asked. "Sorry for getting caught? Sorry for humiliating someone who turned out to be important? Or sorry for revealing who you really are when you think there are no consequences?" The question hung in the air like an accusation, because that was exactly what they were sorry about. Not the cruelty itself, the fact that their cruelty had been directed at the wrong target. "You see," Evangeline said, addressing the entire cabin, "I didn't need to be successful for what you did to me to be wrong. I didn't need to be wealthy or famous or accomplished for you to treat me with basic human dignity. The problem isn't that you humiliated a CEO. The problem is that you humiliated a human being." Travis watched her speak with obvious admiration. Here was someone who had been broken down and humiliated, who had been reduced to tears and panic attacks, and who was now using her voice to educate the very people who had attacked her. "I will never need to prove my worth to anyone in this cabin," Evangeline concluded, "but you will spend the rest of your lives trying to prove that you're better than what you showed me today." Chadwick Rivers, the pilot, had been listening to the entire exchange through the aircraft's internal communication. As the captain of the flight, he had the authority to make decisions that seemed impossible under normal circumstances, and what he had heard convinced him that normal circumstances no longer applied. His voice came through the aircraft's speaker, addressing all passengers. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Rivers speaking. After careful consideration of the events that have transpired in our first-class cabin, I am making the decision to return this aircraft to the gate." A murmur of confusion spread through the plane. Passengers who had been unaware of the drama in first class were suddenly wondering why their flight was being delayed. "Flight 447 to Los Angeles is hereby canceled," Captain Rivers continued. "The behavior exhibited by passengers in this cabin today falls below the standards of human decency required for air travel. All passengers will be required to rebook their flights and, I hope, reconsider their attitudes toward their fellow human being." The announcement was met with stunned silence. In the history of commercial aviation, flights were canceled for weather, mechanical problems, and security threats, but never for moral failure. Travis took the intercom microphone one final time. "This flight is canceled because you needed to be reminded that your money, your status, and your privilege don't give you the right to dehumanize others. Take this time to think about what kind of people you want to be." As Flight 447 slowly taxied back toward the gate, the atmosphere in the first-class cabin was one of complete devastation. The passengers who had been united in their cruel entertainment just an hour before now sat in isolated shame, each one forced to confront the reality of their behavior's consequences. Dashiell Montclair sat slumped in his seat, his head in his hand. The businessman, who had been so confident in his righteousness, so certain of his superiority, now looked like a broken man. He kept glancing at Evangeline as if he wanted to say something, but the words wouldn't come. "How do you apologize for trying to destroy someone's dignity?" How do you take back an hour of calculated cruelty? Miss Thornberry, he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't know what to say. What I did was unforgivable. Evangeline looked at him with an expression that was neither kind nor cruel, just tired. You're right, she said simply. It was unforgivable. But that's something you'll have to live with, not me. Sterling Montgomery, the tech executive who had claimed to know everyone important in Silicon Valley, was staring at his hands in horror. He was remembering every conference where he had heard Evangeline speak, every article he had read about her innovations, every time he had praised her work to colleagues. He had admired her from a distance, while being ready to destroy her in person. I've quoted your research, he said in disbelief. I've used your patents in my own company's products. I've recommended your work to investors. How could I not recognize you? Because when you saw my face instead of my resume, you stopped seeing me as a person worth knowing, Evangeline replied. Arabella Fairweather was crying openly now, her composure completely shattered. She was thinking about her own granddaughter, a bright young black girl who wanted to be an engineer. What would happen to her dreams if she encountered people like the woman Arabella had revealed herself to be today? My granddaughter looks up to women like you, Arabella said through her tears. She wants to be a scientist, and God, what have I become? You became exactly who you've always been, Evangeline said with devastating honesty. You just finally showed it in public. The plane came to a stop at the gate, and passengers throughout the aircraft began to murmur in confusion and anger. They had places to be, meetings to attend, lives to live. The idea that their travel plans had been disrupted because of the behavior of strangers in first class seemed absurd to those who hadn't witnessed what had happened. Captain Rivers made another announcement. Passengers, I want to be clear about why this flight has been canceled. What occurred in our first-class cabin today was not a simple disagreement or misunderstanding. It was a systematic attempt to humiliate and dehumanize a fellow passenger based on her race and age. As the captain of this aircraft, I refuse to transport people who believe that their ticket price gives them the right to treat others as less than human. The weight of his words settled over the entire aircraft. Passengers in economy and business class began to understand that something extraordinary had happened, something significant enough to prompt an unprecedented decision by the flight crew. Phoenix Caldwell, who had been recording the incident from the beginning, found herself staring at her phone in horror. She had hours of footage showing her own participation in the humiliation of one of the most successful young entrepreneurs in the country. She had been planning to post it on social media for likes and shares, but now she realized she had documented her own moral failure. I recorded everything, she said numbly. I was going to put it online. I thought it was funny. It will go online, Travis said firmly, but not the way you intended. The world needs to see what happened here today, not for entertainment, but for education. Winslow, the flight attendant, approached Evangeline with tears in her eyes. Ma'am, I am so sorry for what you experienced on this aircraft. I should have done more to protect you. You did what you could, Evangeline replied graciously. This wasn't your failure, this was theirs. As passengers began to disembark, the true consequences of the canceled flight became clear. Missed meetings, disrupted vacation, connecting flights that would now be impossible to catch. But more importantly, dozens of videos of the incident were already being uploaded to social media platforms. Within hours, hashtags like "Flight Cancelled" and "Evangeline Thornberry" would be trending worldwide. The story would be picked up by every major news outlet, analyzed by commentators, and used as a case study in business schools and sociology classes for years to come. Dashiell would find himself unemployed within a week, his company unable to weather the public relations disaster of having him as an employee. Sterling would lose several major clients who could no longer trust his judgment. Arabella would be forced to resign from the charity boards she served on, her reputation irreparably damaged. But the consequences went beyond individual careers. The incident sparked a national conversation about unconscious bias, about the assumptions people make based on race and age, about the way privilege can blind people to their own cruelty. As the first-class passengers filed off the plane in shame, Evangeline remained seated, gathering her scattered documents with the same methodical precision she brought to her business dealing. Travis waited with her, ensuring she wouldn't have to face any more confrontations alone. "Why did you do that?" Evangeline asked him as they collected the last of her papers. "You could have just stayed out of it. This wasn't your fight. It became my fight the moment I watched them try to destroy your dignity," Travis replied. "No one should have to face that kind of hatred alone. You know they're going to tear you apart in the media for this. Getting a flight canceled over a seating, that's how they'll frame it." Travis shrugged. "Let them. I've got a platform, and I used it for something that mattered. I can live with whatever consequences come from that." Evangeline looked at him with genuine gratitude. "You didn't just defend me, you made them see me. For the first time in that whole ordeal, someone made them see me as a human being. You did that yourself with that speech. I just gave you the space to do it." As they walked through the terminal together, Evangeline felt something she hadn't experienced in hours. Hope. Not hope that people would treat her better because of her wealth or success, but hope that maybe, just maybe, some of those passengers would remember this day and choose to be better the next time they encountered someone different from themselves. "You know what the worst part was?" Evangeline said, as they approached the airline customer service desk. "It wasn't even the first time, it's just the first time it was recorded." "Then maybe that's why it needed to happen this way," Travis said. "So people could see what's been happening all along." 6 months later, Evangeline would testify before Congress about discrimination in travel and corporate setting. The video from Flight 447 would be used as evidence in her testimony, helping to pass legislation that strengthened protections against harassment on commercial flights. Daschle would eventually find work again, but only after completing a year of community service and sensitivity training. He would spend the rest of his career trying to make amends for 30 minutes of cruelty that defined him in the public eye forever. The merger with Meridian Automotive would proceed as planned, creating exactly the 15,000 jobs Evangeline had promised. But more importantly, her company would establish a scholarship fund for young women of color, pursuing careers in technology and engineering. And Travis Kelce would never again sit silently when he witnessed injustice, knowing that sometimes the most important victories happen off the field, in airport terminals and airplane cabins, when ordinary people choose to do extraordinary things. As Evangeline boarded her rescheduled flight the next morning in first class, where she belonged, she carried with her not just her business documents and merger agreements, but the knowledge that even in humanity's darkest moment, there are still people willing to stand up and say, "This is wrong." The contract that Daschle had waved around like a prop would go on to create a cleaner, more sustainable world. But the real change happened in the hearts and minds of everyone who witnessed what occurred on Flight 447. A reminder that dignity isn't earned through success or wealth, but simply by being human. And sometimes, when enough people remember that lesson at the same time, the whole world changes.